There's a moment in every oversight hearing when the temperature shifts, when the room stops pretending this is just policy talk, and someone decides to ask the question everyone else is too polite, too conditioned, too afraid to say out loud. In this exchange, that someone is Madeleine Dean, and what she delivers isn't a question, it's a reckoning.
Ms. Dean.
Thank you, Chairman Adderholt, Ranking Member DeLauro, for holding this hearing, and I thank you, Secretary McMahon, for being here today. I want to start with the role of the Department of Education. I come at this as a mother, as a grandmother, a former teacher myself, a former state legislator with two grandmothers who were public school teachers. I have a lot of experience with the education system in Pennsylvania as well as the country. First, the history of the federal education involvement, and Ms. Watson-Coleman was getting at some of this that I'd like to build upon. Federal investments in education began to increase dramatically in the 50s and 60s and 70s, in tandem with the rise of the success of the civil rights movement. Americans finally began to recognize the vast inequalities in our education system. Thus, federal funding was used to improve education access for students from poor backgrounds, or minority students, for women, for people with disabilities, and other marginalized groups. Finally, Congress established the Department of Education in 1979, replacing the Office of Education. Secretary McMahon, it's alarming that you and the President want to turn that clock back. You take us back to a time before any federal oversight of education, before many of the programs that guarantee free and equal access to education for all Americans. You said as much in your testimony. After all the Department of Education's work to ensure equal access to education, you're embarking on the department's final mission? You intend to put yourself out of a job? That's a little jarring to me. If you were a pediatric oncologist, I'd welcome that. Let's get you out of a job through cures, through healing, through ending of pediatric cancer. But ending a department that is supposed to oversee the education of our very youngest, to guide their future? Have you taken the time to educate yourself about this history? I'd encourage you, go ask students who attended school back then. Black students, brown students, students with disabilities, students from poor families. What was access like for them before the Department of Education? Frankly, eliminating the Department of Education, to me, is rather Orwellian. The President and his administration don't want an educated populace. Why don't we just go back to the book 1984 if it hasn't been banned? It's clear to me, this administration wants an uneducated electorate so that Mr. Trump and his courtiers can control thought, therefore control votes, and control the population. I'll note a secondary measure here that is going on. The increase in funding for charter schools. We know that charter schools originally were supposed to be incubators of the best ideas, great practices to be brought back into the public school education system so that every kid had an access to such things. But this administration and you, who want to put yourself out of a job, following the playbook, page 319 of Project 2025, first sentence, shutter the Department of Education. You're all following the book, that book. Too bad that one wasn't banned. And yet, privatizing is really the other ambition, an uneducated electorate and profit and privatization of our education system. Do you promise us that that isn't your ambition?
That clearly is not my ambition. I think I've stated that very well today.
Then why in God's name do you want to shutter it? Why don't you want to protect kids with disabilities? Why don't you want to protect kids who have been every decade denied equal access simply because of how much their parents make, the zip code they live in, the color of their skin? Why are you shuttering a department that's supposed to lift up those children?
Because those programs don't have to flow through the Department of Education, and they
can flow through the state. I was a state legislator. That's called shift and shaft. I've spoken with the governor of Pennsylvania. They can't pick up the tab anymore for education of our students. Not to mention, it would be inequitable by state, by state, by state. Why are you in this job at all? If you don't have a dedication to the future of our children, why are you in this job?
I, too, am a mother and a grandmother, and I want the best for my family going forward,
Vouchers.
for my grandchildren, for my great-grandchildren, and I hope to leave a legacy that we have established best practices for education that all the states can use. That would be a great legacy to be able to leave, to be able to show states these are some of the things that they can do. I think states have to look at their budgets.
Madam Secretary, the legacy you will be leaving is that I shut down the Department of Education. How we educate our children determines not just their future, but our own.
But
I think it's a sad legacy you will leave. I yield back.
The Department of Education is not educating anyone. Well, I can say this, and I will.
From the first sentence, Dean isn't tiptoeing. She drags the conversation all the way back to the foundation of American education, the 1950s, the 60s, the civil rights era, the fight to ensure that every child, regardless of race, disability, or income, could actually step into a classroom with equal footing. She lays out the history with surgical precision. The Department of Education didn't appear out of thin air. It was born because the country finally admitted that leaving education entirely to the states produced inequality so severe it required federal intervention. And that's the pressure point she presses straight into Secretary McMahon, because what Dean sees isn't just a policy disagreement, it's a rollback of 70 years of civil rights architecture. She doesn't warm up, she doesn't circle the runway, she drops the hammer immediately. You intend to put yourself out of a job. And she doesn't say that metaphorically, she means it literally. The administration's stated plan, shuttering the U.S. Department of Education altogether, exactly as outlined in Project 2025's playbook. Dean makes that connection explicit, page number, sentence, motive. Then she escalates. If you're a pediatric oncologist, she says, your goal is to put yourself out of business, because ending pediatric cancer would be a miracle. But shutting down the agency responsible for equity in education, that's not a cure, that's a demolition. Dean forces McMahon to confront the real-world consequences, not the slogans, not the talking points, but the raw historical truth. Before federal oversight, students with disabilities, students of color, poor students didn't have equal access. States did not fill those gaps. States allowed those gaps. That's when Dean makes her most brutal comparison, calling the plan Orwellian, not subtle, not softened. She accuses the administration of preferring an uneducated electorate because uneducated voters are easier to manipulate. And she doesn't stop there. She ties the entire push to privatization, charter school expansions, diverted funding, the slow starving of public education to benefit systems that profit when public schools fail. Dean exposes the two-track system she believes the administration is building, an uneducated electorate and profit. Then, the climax, the question that strips away every euphemism, every shield, every talking point. Why are you in this job at all if you don't have a dedication to the future of our children? Why are you in this job? It's not a question about policy, it's a question about legitimacy. And McMahon's response only intensifies the moment. She offers generalized language about legacy, about states, about best practices, but never refutes the core charge, that eliminating the department means eliminating federal protections that states can and will not replace. Dean pounces. She calls it exactly what she believes it is: shift and shaft. Shift responsibility to the states, shaft the students left behind. And the way she ends it, that's the gut punch. The legacy you will be leaving is that I shut down the Department of Education. I think it's a sad legacy you will leave. No metaphor, no euphemism, just a reality check delivered at full volume. This wasn't a conversation about bureaucracy. This was a confrontation about the future of American democracy, because the ability to think, to learn, to participate, to challenge begins in the classroom. And Dean is making the case that eliminating the department isn't just a policy shift, it's a power grab.